Hi, welcome to the Media Copilot. It's a podcast about how AI is changing media, news, and communication. My name is Pete Pachal. I covered tech for a long time as a journalist, and now I have deep conversations with the media people, the builders, and the creators who are all answering the question, how will we get information in the future, and how will that change the jobs and the industries whose business is information, especially media? One of the loudest fights in media right now is about how AI systems get their information in the first place. Publishers are watching bots scrape their work, while platforms build tools that answer questions directly instead of sending readers to the original sources. That's pushed a quieter fight into the open, licensing. If AI companies pay for content and follow clear terms, does that create a healthier and more sustainable media economy? Or does it just formalize the same imbalance that traffic and social platforms have already created, one where the biggest publishers and the biggest AI companies benefit, while everyone else gets left out? My guest this week works right in the middle of that question. Michael Ellis is president of NewsTechs, a content licensing and syndication company that spent more than 2 decades moving publisher content into research databases, financial platforms, and now AI systems. NewsTechs signs non-exclusive deals with publishers, enriches and packages their content, and distributes it to platforms like LexisNexis and Thomson Reuters, along with newer AI-focused partners like ProRata and AskNews. What makes Ellis worth talking to is that he's not just selling access. His public writing argues that AI licensing has to define purpose, not just grant permission, and that publishers, especially smaller ones, need collective structures if they're going to see real revenue from the AI shift. He's also been willing to call out voluntary licensing frameworks as too weak, arguing that they need real enforcement to actually move the needle. So today, we're going to talk about what NewsTechs actually does, how AI is reshaping the economics of content licensing, and what separates good source data from AI slop, and whether licensing intermediaries like NewsTechs are solving publisher problems or just adding another layer between the publishers and the AI companies that need their work. I'm excited to get into all of that. But a quick note before we get started, if you're listening on Apple or Spotify, please leave a 5-star review and maybe a nice comment if you can. And if you're watching on YouTube, please like the video and subscribe to the channel if you don't mind. Those things really do help people find the show. All right, let's get started. Michael Ellis, welcome to the Media Copilot.
Thanks, Pete. Happy to be here.
Sweet. So you're in the middle of a very active and sometimes a very messy part of the market. Basically where it's publisher economics and where it meets AI. That means obviously you're dealing with everything from copyright to digital rails, to serving content, product design, everything in between. It must be fun.
It is fun. It's kept us busy for the last 20 years and is always changing.
Nice. Well, I want to get into all that and all the things I sort of set up in the intro. But first, I know some of my listeners might not even be familiar with NewsTech. So please give me the 411. What does the company actually do, at least today?
Sure. Well, for publishers, we're a content syndication service, and we're specialized in the research market. So this is one area that I think publishers don't always have their eye on. You mentioned a couple of our customers there, LexisNexis. You had an interview with Tracy Mabry from Factivo a little while back, for example. They're not one of our customers, but they could be. Call me Tracy. Yes. So, we basically are a turnkey solution for publishers that want to have a brand presence in those research markets through those information platforms. And I could say more detail about that. But we are also there kind of on the front lines looking at new destinations for content on all kinds of AI-enabled platforms. So you mentioned ProRata, for example, and AskNews. Those are also customers of ours. Quick tip, I actually met Rob through your podcast, Rob of AskNews. So I'm just kind of paying it forward here.
Yeah, he's got a great platform. Got to catch up with him.
No, it's wonderful. And I think we have a good kind of symbiotic relationship going there. In fact, I'll just take a minute to kind of dive into that because, you mentioned how many layers are we dealing with here in this ecosystem. And I think one thing that I encounter that I've spoken about publishers, one way in which we help the customers is by really bridging the gap between them and the publishing world, which they may not totally understand. Some of these guys are totally from the tech world and they don't really see things from the publisher's perspective, or they don't understand licensing.
Who is your target customer?
Yeah. So it's basically a company that is looking for licensed content curation services. So publishers are not our customers. We consider them partners. A customer would be like an information platform that needs licensed curated content, like Effective, as I've mentioned before, or LexisNexis. And Rob was someone that, I reached out to you after he appeared on your podcast because he said he was looking for licensed content. Because, he's there. So just to take a step back, in a broad sense, it's anybody who's trying to do something with AI and wants to do the right thing and get high quality curated licensed content on their platform and not just be taking scraped content with not without a lot of information as to provenance. So Rob is kind of a perfect example because he is one such developer. He's looking for quality. He also wants to remunerate publishers and he wants that bridge. But, his focus is on his users, right? The people that are, consuming the information on the platform. So we help manage the relationships with publishers and also look for new sources all the time based on, the platform's desires. So when someone works with us, when they sign up to, be a customer for NewsTechs, we have a platform where they can go and they can see all of the sources, all of the publishers with whom we have licensed content agreements, and they can pick and choose which ones they want given, their use case.
So you're kind of operating a marketplace for obviously a very specific type of customer. And so I'm curious how you, I guess, bucket the information that is on your platform. So if I'm a publisher, which I am, but I mean, if I come to you theoretically as a publisher and it's like, hey, I'd like to be part of your marketplace, is there a profile of type of, you said sort of mostly for businesses and they want sort of research, like what is your filter there? And then if they pass the filter, how do you then bucket the people you work with?
Well, I can speak in terms of categories, but I think what I want to get at a little bit here is more the spirit and the nature of the publishers that we like to work with. I mentioned we're over 20 years old. So basically NewsTechs was kind of born in the age of blogging. And this became a really important source of cutting edge, you might describe sort of insider information where you have people, some of them journalists, some of them not, just really, really close to an industry that start publishing online, either through a blog or you may have specialist publishers that are focused on a particular industry. And it was, how can I describe it? I speak about our content as open web content, where we have many, many individual sources that are independent from what you might call mainstream. I don't know if that term really applies anymore anyhow, but let's just take one space, okay? So the technology space. I mean, we started out, you worked for Mashable.
Quite a while. I was a tech editor.
Right. So I wasn't there at the time, but I believe that our founder ran into Pete Cashmore, the founder of Mashable. It was at a conference or maybe he sent him an email. I'm not sure. But, basically we're always in there getting in touch with people that are trying to do something new in the media space, given the kind of wild west of the open web, right? So we work with a lot of what I would call specialist publications that are dedicated to a certain niche. And we have moved from one publication to the next as they've kind of evolved over time. So like in the tech space, you had a company like Mashable that was sold to Ziff Davis, I think in 2017, 2018. But in that period in between, we've had relationships with tons of other publications that sort of maybe were also on the cutting edge for 6 months, 12 months at a time, right? So went from, something like a Mashable, you had PC Mag, which is an older one from Ziff Davis, onto TechCrunch, onto...
You used to work there too. You're just list all the places I used to work.
Boy Genius Report, into, there was another one called Pando Daily, and they've kind of since evolved, right? And now we're working with the ones that are kind of most current today in the technology space, in emerging technology, in areas like regulatory issues. So any industry that is kind of facing potential impact from changes in policy or law or geopolitics. That's another space. And then the last one is areas around sustainability. So publications covering not only environment, but also energy, supply chain issues, and a lot of international coverage as well. And then the last thing I'll say is we have a relationship with the Institute for Nonprofit News. So you may be familiar with them, but it's many new business models, local journalism or state-based journalism in the U.S., folks like the Texas Tribune or Chalkbeat. And we basically very, very easily kind of help them move into this AI space so that they don't need to take their focus off their core audience and their core mission and just getting people to their website.
So that's very interesting. I mean, obviously, it's a good summary of like the kinds of publishers you work with and your sort of philosophy with them. So I want to sort of jump into sort of the AI component of this, and the sort of discovery, distribution, and essentially, I guess, the value prop that NewsTechs offers, which is because you mentioned like open web, which I think is one of the key things here, where it's like if you're a publisher, that's obviously like the ones you mentioned, some of the ones I work for. It's like it's on the internet, it's free, just go, and it's all ad supported. And now certainly the internet with the AI as this intermediating and mediating force, it is the open web seems like is seemingly getting sort of crunched and devalued. And so in the old days, I guess, you'd kind of say, well, I'm just on the internet, and yeah, there's obviously syndication and it's not that complicated. And now AI can just kind of like parse that with no problems. But well, there are problems. So this is the kind of thing I want to get like in other words, like from a publishing standpoint, where you're just like, well, I'm on the internet, like I'm a blog, whatever. Give me sort of a little bit more on the value prop of like the quality and the sort of direct connection that you provide to your customers to these sources. And then I also want to sort of understand how that works vis-a-vis paywalls and sort of other traditional ways of gatekeeping content.
Sure. So from the publisher's perspective, it's really about brand reach, I would say. Because when you're in these platforms, one of the nice things actually is it kind of levels the playing field. And that's kind of what I was going to say about AI in general. I actually have quite a positive orientation toward AI with respect to open web content and the long tail because of the way that it can find a really niche article or publication and surface it with respect to a particular query. So I mean, basically, if you would like to be in these platforms and you don't necessarily have your own licensing team, maybe you don't have a big marketing budget, the research market it's an important place, but it's probably not your core audience. Maybe not necessarily. So NewsTechs helps to get your brand in front of those people, and it hits them while they're at work. They're using the content for a piece of research in general, and it wasn't necessarily intended for them. And then what happens is it kind of forms its own little audience within that platform. Someone will favorite it, or it kind of spreads via word of mouth. And what we find is over time, it kind of gains traction on certain specific platforms. And, it might be a publication that you wouldn't expect. Just to give a quick example, I mean, one that we work with is called London Daily News. Okay, there's another one in London that covers nothing but the taxi industry. These guys have a subscription-based model. They've got some ads on their site, but they want to target these professionals in this work environment, and NewsTechs can provide that brand presence. And then over time, it also does generate revenue for them. It's incremental revenue, which it probably doesn't move the needle, to be honest with you, Pete. I mean, publishers don't work with us specifically for the revenue. It's more for just the ability to actually have a presence and an influence in an environment where, most of these big AI, foundation model providers or the big information research platforms that we serve, they just don't have the capacity to service all of these small publishers that have excellent content and are needed in order to service all the queries that people are putting into these AI answer engines.
So I know you've written before that AI content licensing is about defining purpose and not just granting access. And I feel like that's partly what you're getting at. Can you explore that a little better? Like, and just what do you mean by that?
Definitely. I mean, again, what I like about AI is that you don't have to always think about keywords all the time.
Hmm.
Okay.
Yeah,
You know,
and that's on
you,
both sides of the equation, I think.
that's right. That's
Yeah.
right. It's kind of weird, but actually it allows you to write more like a human in some
Mm.
ways. And if you stick to your purpose as a brand, you can zero in on the particular community that you're serving, and you don't think about, I don't know, what are the questions people are asking on LexisNexis or the London Stock Exchange Group, right? You don't try to game the system. You just stay true to your core. And as I say, every publisher we work with has their core revenue streams and their business model, and NewsTechs is strictly complementary. So so we help amplify the impact of the good work that you're already doing.
Mm. And then you said the revenue is probably incremental for most folks, but I guess a content agreement look like? And I guess that would be a picture of what you think a fair content agreement looks like, um, which zeroes in on, I guess, sort of specific clauses around scope, retention, attribution, pricing, obviously.
Yeah.
What does a fair content agreement actually look like for
Well,
AI?
yeah, for AI. For me, it has to be about usage-based compensation. To
Hmm.
me, the market is still developing, and you need some sort of mechanism to discover the right price for a given use case. I don't certainly not for small publishers. I don't think that there's a way for us to say in advance what is a fair price for, X piece of content, because it will depend. And so every single agreement that we have with our customers, the platforms that we serve the content to, is revenue share based. We don't ask for some kind of fixed fee in advance. By the way, that's actually kind of why it works for them as well, because they don't know what content is going to do well until it does well, right?
Sure.
So we have the same exact relationship with our publishers. They've already worked very hard to produce amazing content. We simply want to make it available as many places as possible, and then when there's value to be captured, we capture that value, and then we share that back with them. And the relationship is totally non-exclusive, like you said before, so they can work with whomever else they want and syndicate wherever else they want.
I'm curious about potential, particularly with AI. So we're here, like you look at the broader stats of AI growth, the use of it. And I think the most reliable thing I've sort of read in this context is from the Reuters digital their annual digital news report. And it said something like 10% of sort of searching, and I'm sort of generalizing here, but like is like through AI systems. But those are sort of the most engage newer users. Now, you have very specific customers, right? It's not as broad as what they're looking at. And so I'm curious um, how you see growth of this from your sort of highly specialized um, customer base. Are we seeing it like, because if you look at those stats, it's like, oh, 10%, but we're all kind of like on the assumption it's going to grow to something much more massive than that. And are you seeing a similar growth in your both the existing customers that you have and their usage, as also like is your TAM increasing essentially like as AI grows? Like sort of trying to give a picture to like publishers who partner with you, like, yeah, it might be incremental today. Could it be not necessarily business saving, but is there good growth potential here?
There is, and it's hard to predict, but we've had a couple of cases where the publication fits a particular niche, and it's take the Ukraine war. We have
Mhm.
publishers that we were working with before that were covering Ukraine, and you can imagine what might happen when a war breaks out, right? I mean, they become much more interesting, right? Uh, and so it's one of those chicken and egg type problems where I think it's kind of a difficult one for a publisher to strategize around. And honestly, that's why NewsTechs exists, because we can say, okay, in this complementary space, which is not your focus, we can be there if and when a big win does happen for you. And I can't say that I have like a formula for what does well, but we have some basic notions that we look for when we reach out to publishers and ask them to work with us.
And I was thinking specifically about like smaller publishers, and I don't know if, well, I guess I'm not sure how many you would consider small or where that line is in terms of the number of partners you have. And I know, can you tell me again how many, the number of partners? Is it, it's in the thousands, right?
Yes, so we operate relationships with over 1,000 publishers. We have like 1,000 plus license agreements in place, and they may have more than one publication. So it's at the moment I think it's just past 1,700 publications that we represent.
Nice. And would you divide those into small, medium, large? How do you sort of partition that?
Yeah, I mean, mostly small, Pete. I mean, there many of them. I don't have the exact stats, but I would say a large percentage of them have probably certainly less than 50 people working with them. Okay, just to kind of give you a rough idea. And then we have a handful of big publishers we work with, like Ziff Davis. We have relationships with Axios, for example. So what happens is we started working with them when they were small, and then they've kind of grown up to become a big name, right? But our focus remains on the smaller publishers together. And I think this is kind of one of the core messages, where, I don't know, we were talking about purpose before at NewsTechs, is to bring these smaller publishers into some kind of a model where they can apply their combined strength. So NewsTechs helps.
Right.
NewsTechs helps to do that. When we come together, these 1,600 publications, they actually produce 1.5 million articles per month. I mean,
Nice.
And then when someone wants to work with us, we say, well, you can have access to all these smaller publications. And I think that it's a kind of a win-win on both sides.
Cool. I'm kind of wondering about what you see working, not in terms of subject, but like when someone's a partner with you, I imagine there would need to be some kind of um, machine readable some basics on what they need to be doing. And I think this is kind of an emerging category somewhat in AI. Like, how do you like? It's, GEO is a thing that seems to be rapidly evolving, basically optimizing your content for generative engines. As someone who distributes in this sort of arena, are you seeing anything that surprises you in terms of certain types of techniques or anything that lets certain content punch above its weight? Or is anything emerging in terms of, like recommendations you would give to publications, particularly smaller publications that want to, get their stuff in front of the right people?
Yeah. I mean, in our case, I think the big picture is about putting everything in context. Put your story in as much context as possible. Just a super simple example, these bots, they like to take a story and at least pull out the names and entities that they see mentioned there. If you can make sure that you are in some way making your content machine readable, where at least these people names, company names, place names are readily available and can be pulled in by a bot, it can do wonders. So in our particular space, I mentioned before, people working on these research platforms and favoriting a particular publication. They also say, give me any publication that mentions the ticker symbol for Microsoft, right?
Okay.
Maybe you're not a
A
financial
lot.
publication, right? Maybe you're
Right.
not a financial publication, but if your story has something to do with Microsoft. Actually, you should pull that entity out at least, because it might get picked up by a NewsTechs or by some other bot, because someone's interested in as much information as possible about that particular company.
Right. I guess it makes sense. It's like some of these interesting filters that, that's kind of an obvious one. And I think um, AI might even find some non-obvious ones as it's sort of like, these query systems that fan out and try to find different things. But that's definitely a good one. So I know you've talked about, or NewsTechs has talked about, that not just metadata but provenance matters, for AI. And I wanted to explain what do you mean by provenance exactly?
Again, it comes down to a type of a piece of information that helps people understand the context here, right?
Hmm.
So, I mean, provenance, it sounds like a fancy word, but if you go to a website, is there an about page there? Who is
Hmm.
behind this thing? Um, does it say anything about their process? They don't necessarily have to be journalists. It's, of course, better if they are. But what is the editorial process? Who are the people behind it? Where is it coming from? Who is it funded by? All of those
Hmm.
aspects. And those are some of the things that my team looks at when we, look at signing publishers on. We want to know as much context about you as possible, because that is, I mean, honestly, I think it's the key. We need good content, but we need good context as well.
Right. Yeah, I feel like it's sort of the grown up, or the AI version at least, of the old trust signals in SEO, with things like bylines and then bios and then having those linked. And, you didn't have the same kind of inference systems and sort of looking at patterns that AI does. So it's a sort of a different set of signals now, that I hope is a little harder to fake or game, right? I don't know. You tell me if you think that is true, or if I mean, there's certainly gaming in every system, but in terms of this particular idea of like signaling to the system that this is trustworthy, so well-sourced content, does that become a harder thing to fake, I guess, is the direct
I think
question.
so, because, you know, look, if I want to know who these people are, the more data points that I have, I would say that it's difficult to fake. Let's say you wanted to fake NewsTechs. A 20
Mhm.
year like a 20-year history of like all of the pieces of information that points to we say we are who we say we are. I think that's pretty difficult to fake. And I think, there's going to be AI tools, there already are, that help to detect, fakers out there
Mhm.
and AI slop and so forth. So I kind of feel pretty optimistic about that one, actually.
And I'm curious about how you think of and how NewsTechs and other systems like treat AI assisted content, and or even AI generated content. I would hope mostly it's assisted, but anyway, like some people call all AI content AI slop. It's a popular term, obviously, but there's obviously more and more AI content out there. And as I've written before, not all AI content is slop, but it's certainly an indicator. It's the strongest indicator that something is slop, right? So how do you balance that? How do you think about AI content, like even within sort of like
Yeah.
the publisher circle, the inner circle of sources that you have?
Well, we asked the publisher, how do you use
Hmm.
AI? Is this content completely AI free? That's the first level. Then there's, you use AI, but you review it before you actually publish it. And then there's, oh, we just let it rip, and we put the publication up there. Um, that last category is not one that it's one that we're very careful with, but we actually do have
Hmm.
some publishers in the financial space in particular that have some very high end, and they're highly responsible people, systems where they go in and they actually, combine various data points in order to produce a story with a specific scope that is kind of at a level of accuracy that's acceptable enough to some of these financial information systems in particular. But in general, Pete, we ask the publisher, and then we make this information available to the
Mhm.
platforms. And that's another piece of context that helps them decide how they want to treat that particular source.
I'd love to talk a little bit about your partnerships and ProRata, and I've talked to those guys about some stuff. In fact, we're working together on an event this summer. Full disclosure. But tell me about how that partnership came about, and how their model, which obviously is very centered on attribution and compensation, how it complements what you're doing.
Yeah, I mean, they're great. It was just within our personal network. So, you know, somebody who had worked with NewsTechs many years ago was working with ProRata, and they said you should really work with these guys because they can help you scale. Because, as you probably know, I mean, they're great. They've developed so many direct relationships with publishers, but there's a limit to how much you can do directly, and so they like to work with us so that we can help expand, the source of licensed content that they have on their platform. They're a great compliment because they're in there also trying to uh, add, I think, to the arsenal that publishers have at their disposal to be able to bring some, as I say, some power, I think, to this market in two ways. I
Mm,
mean, one, I think the way that they use their attribution to say, look, given this output, these publications really deserve X percentage of the credit, right? So you have that. They also, I think, have a really smart way for those publishers that, are open to it, of helping publishers help each other out through
yeah.
their chat interface, right? Because if you want, you can just have a chat interface for your own content on your site. But if someone asks a question and if the publisher has allowed other content to be surfaced there from other publishers, it helps keep that person on that one publisher's site, right? And vice
Mhm.
versa. So that's another dynamic where I feel like, again, I guess at the level of mission, we can say, we need to come together as publishers in order to balance, I think, the concentration of power that we see on the tech side. And ProRata is like one way in which they've actually operationalized that and kind of brought it to life.
And we mentioned like Ask News a couple of times. I'm curious, like how I've talked to Rob a few times too about a lot of different things, and like including like the atomic unit of journalism and information, and which comes up often when you get deep into this stuff. And I know they think about their grounded synthetic data as preserving traceability, sort of similar to the attribution. Um, and but maybe not with the original wording so much. Curious how you think about that, and how it uh, vis-a-vis sort of the core rights issue on content. That's what I always sort of comes down to, right? Is it the story? Is it the wording? Like it's not really the underlying fact. So
Yeah.
I don't know, a lot of concepts here, but I'm just curious
I
what you
just
think about it in
I just
context of
think
that customer.
I think Pete, it's another level at which your content can exist where it can provide value. I mean, Ask News has got this system in place in order to produce like the purest, best possible form of your content for discoverability in a
Hmm.
particular context, right? I mean, they're focused on like high end enterprise research and people in prediction markets and finance and stuff. And they're really, really good at helping people avoid bias, right? In their
Hmm.
research. I mean, you couldn't do that as a publisher on your own. That kind of middle layer, that sort of synthetic version of your content where it's just kind of taking out the key pieces allows someone to find it. But if they want to get the value from the original article, you know, that full level, that highest level of resolution is not going to be there. Like on like some stock photo sites where you can get like a low res version of the photo and maybe
Yeah.
it's good enough for your particular purpose. But if you want the real thing, it's going to say, well, you should go to this particular location, right? And I think that the market is going to continue to evolve to the point where, okay, it's like, okay, we know now we want this particular article or we want more from this source. Now, can we create more value when someone says, give it to me. I want to see the full text, right? So I think
Yeah.
it's going to evolve to produce more points of value for publishers that they can eventually monetize.
Yeah, I feel like that's actually you've sort of awoken something in me with the image analogy, because I do feel like this is the discoverability problem, but not quite solved, but one aspect of it. I'll tell you what I mean. So what I think those photo sites are incredibly good at now is showing you the free image and showing you the premium image right beside it that's like better. And you kind of like go like, oh, this'll do, but I really want that one. And once that happens enough times, you're like, okay, I'll buy a subscription, right? So similarly with like AI information systems, you kind of like, well, here's the summary, but it's really very surface. And what I really need is the underlying data reporting, et cetera, to get what I want. Um, if you have the right audience, which I think is kind of the problem NewsTechs and other things solve, that will be the thing they do if they see it enough times. Am I sort of getting that, or is that sort of like where you're
Yes,
going?
definitely. I mean, I think
Cool.
it's nice because it allows some publishers to freely share their information without feeling like the original text is just out there.
Yeah.
Because historically, something that and we still do with some publishers is, they give us some of their content, but maybe they have a paywall
Yeah.
for
That's what I was just going to ask about.
okay.
How does that work
Well,
vis-a-vis via
there you
paywall?
go. I mean, we take whatever a publisher is open to syndicating, and it's their choice, however they want to do it. It can work because these are professionals doing research. They come across your content. They see what's been freely made available. Then they say, "Well, I want to see the paywalled stuff," and they may end up going there and purchasing a subscription.
I guess the trick is always like, how do you tease the paywalled stuff? And this is an age old problem, right? But without giving it away,
Yeah,
because you want to like have you want essentially the engine looking for you to know that you have the thing that the person's looking for, but you don't want to give the thing away even to the engine, or at least be assured that the engine won't, will understand that that needs to be preserved. Yeah.
exactly, exactly. And we try to work with platforms that are at least focused on uh, producing some incremental solutions there. And I think Rob Kolk at AskNews is a good example of that. And they're developing new elements to their system as well. I think around looking at certain sources potentially as premium sources or sources that may be good for a particular use case and could be further monetized in different ways.
Well, this honestly steers me into this sort of, as we start to wrap up, a couple of last questions around regulation, enforceability, sort of the, because what sort of happens in sort of the hypothetical scenario I'm talking about is that, oh, the information gets out there somehow, maybe it's reproduced somewhere else, or maybe a less scrupulous actor scrapes the content somehow and then represents that to either the world or specific customers, right? Which is sort of like this big issue now with these information brokers that are ostensibly sort of making a bot friendly internet, but at the same time are sort of, we don't have to get into all the details of that.
Mm.
But I guess my question to you is like, what are the most direct things we can do to sort of get a grip on that idea of like, oh, if even for the people who play in legit services and with the rules, there's this gray to black market over here that is just so damn easy to just go to and get what you want for a steal, ostensibly, maybe not a steal, but maybe it's more simplicity than price. But you know what I mean. So structurally, like, how do we ensure the market sort of tends toward um a more sort of legit, iTunes, Spotify model than the Napster model, to use a very
Yeah.
crude analogy.
Yeah. I mean, in every way that we can make incentives for people to do the right thing, right? And disincentivize people that are doing the wrong thing, right? Uh, and that can happen in a lot of different ways. There's just at the level of mission, the connections that we try to make as an organization with partner organizations. For example, we work with a lot of copyright orgs that are in there defending publishers, representing them, making sure they're in the conversation. NewsTechs does it itself by representing, I would say, the perspective of smaller publishers. So you have kind of that level of advocacy. Then you actually have information and things like price discovery or attribution. So the folks at ProRata we've talked about, you had, I keep mentioning all these guests, but I'm telling you, I connected to them through your
Glad you're a
podcast.
fan, dude.
So Jonathan Wone at Kashmir is doing a
He's so
lot
smart.
around like price discovery, because he's got a lot of information there as once again, kind of a middle layer in the market. So, I mean, I'll mention another one. There's a company called Miso AI. I don't know if you've heard of them. They would be a great guest. That they're doing a lot of like forensic analysis actually about potentially infringing material online, but also
coming soon to the Media Copilot podcast.
There you go. But also trying to actually find ways to, through evidence and data, say, for this reason, this piece of content should command more money in this market or in this particular use case. So you have advocacy, you have people actually operationalizing, technology in order to help fight back. And then I think also business model is important. I think publishers are really used to kind of competing with each other, to be honest with you, or being, let's just say, kind of their own islands.
Yeah.
And
it's almost cultural for sure.
Culturally, I think. And I just think that the thing about technology and tech companies, they have ways of, these network effects kind of encourage concentration, in my opinion. And you have this dispersed group of publishers that is somewhat disorganized with a quite organized small group of tech companies comparatively. And so I think business models that bring publishers together and help them to level the playing field, or at least push back as one force, one body, one unit, let's say through something like ProRata's federated model of content, or what NewsTechs tries to do in its own way by gathering all of these smaller publishers together, we can there also kind of command more market power for the publishers, and I think help them get through what might be a little bit of a rocky time here as AI finds, a new basis for the advertising industry, which I think is kind of at the core of a lot of publishers' concerns right now.
Okay, you could say that. It's a rocky time.
Yeah.
Last question is always the same. As you look out into the AI-mediated future, what is one thing you are concerned about, keeps you up at night, and what's one thing you are hopeful about?
Well, I'll start with the bad news first, because it's related to what I just said. I mean, I'm an optimist. I do think that this will eventually work itself out, but how do you make it past this really rough time? And that's my worry, is that these efforts at the level of business model, or the effort to operationalize what is in effect a new way of pricing advertising on ProRata, other efforts maybe politically to lobby for publishers' interests or things like fair use. I wonder if it's going to happen quickly enough. And that kind of keeps me up at night, because I think you have to be ready when the tool becomes available to come together as an industry. And I'm not sure that the pieces are in place there for publishers to come together in that way, on those different levels I was just describing. So that's what keeps me up at night. I'm hopeful about, I think, again, I kind of think of things from the perspective of smaller publishers. I am hopeful. I do see the technology actually delivering, pieces of information coming from smaller publishers that are finding their way to someone who's posing a question to an answer engine, and they're picking up a new audience or brand presence, even though they don't necessarily have the same marketing budget of a bigger name publisher. And so I see a lot of potential there for the long tail of smaller publishers that we represent, given the power of this technology.
Nice. We'll leave it there. Michael Ellis, thanks for dropping by the Media Copilot.
Thanks, Pete.
Thanks for listening to my conversation with Michael Ellis of NewsTechs. The Media Copilot is a podcast, so please follow and subscribe to us on the platform you're listening to us on. If you're on Spotify or Apple, please leave a 5-star review and a note about what you like. And if you're on YouTube, please like the video and subscribe to the channel. All those things really do help the show because they put the podcast in front of more people. The Media Copilot is produced by Muso Media. Look for their link in the show notes, and don't forget to subscribe to the Media Copilot newsletter as well. Thanks again for being here. Seeing you in the future.